The deal was almost closed. The relationship was going better than any before it. The project was one final push from finished, and right there, at the threshold of something genuinely good, you did something that made no sense. Missed the deadline you tracked for months, picked the fight you didn't need to pick, quietly stopped showing up for the thing that mattered most. Afterward, you couldn't fully explain it even to yourself. You wanted this. You had worked for this, and yet some part of you reached out right at the finish line and pulled the whole thing down. What if this wasn't carelessness or bad luck or a character flaw? What if some part of you sabotaged the success on purpose? Not because it wanted you to fail, but because in its own confused way it believed it was protecting you. Self-sabotage right before success is one of the most confusing patterns a person can experience, precisely because it seems to contradict everything you actually want. But psychology reveals a hidden logic underneath the apparent contradiction, one rooted not in self-destruction, but in an old, mistaken form of self-protection. Welcome back to Milky Way Psychology. Today we are going to break down the hidden reason you sabotage yourself right before success, the psychological mechanisms driving it, and what it actually takes to let yourself finally have the good thing. Stay until the end because the final piece reframes the entire pattern. Have you ever noticed that the closer you get to something good, the more anxious you become, not less? This connects to what psychologist Martina Horner proposed in the late 1960s as fear of success, an early and influential, if later contested, framework describing an unconscious avoidance of achievement driven not by a desire to fail, but by anxiety about the consequences success might bring, higher expectations, greater visibility, or a larger sense of loss if it were ever taken away. Later research broadened and complicated Horner's original findings, but the core observation still resonates for many people. The closer you get to something you genuinely want, the more there is to lose. And for a mind already primed toward anxiety, that increased stake can feel more threatening than simply staying in familiar lower-risk territory, even when that territory is objectively worse for you. Human beings have a well-documented preference for the known over the unknown, even when the known thing is uncomfortable. Psychologists connect this to the status quo bias, our tendency to prefer the current state of affairs, resisting change even when the change would likely be beneficial, simply because the current state is familiar and its risks are already known. If struggle, setback, and near misses have been the norm for most of your life, success itself can register as unfamiliar territory, genuinely destabilizing in a strange way precisely because you don't yet have a template for what happens next. Sabotage, in this light, isn't irrational. It's a return to the version of life your nervous system already knows how to navigate. If you've spent years thinking of yourself as someone who struggles, who doesn't quite make it, who is the underdog rather than the success story, actual success can create a jarring mismatch between the life you're living and the identity you've internalized. Psychologists describe this tension through the lens of self-verification theory developed by researcher William Swan, which found that people are often unconsciously driven to seek out experiences that confirm their existing self-concept, even when that self-concept is negative. This means some part of you may be working quietly and without your conscious permission to keep your life consistent with the story you've long told about who you are, sabotaging success not because you don't want it, but because it doesn't yet match the internal script you've been running for years. And this leads to the fourth mechanism because a mismatch this large often produces a very specific and uncomfortable emotional reaction. As success builds, so does the fear of being exposed as undeserving of it, a pattern closely related to impostor phenomenon, first documented by researchers Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes. For some people, the anxiety of waiting to be found out becomes so unbearable that self-sabotage functions as a strange kind of relief. Better to fail on your own terms than to be exposed on someone else's. This is why the sabotage often arrives right before the biggest moment of visibility, the final presentation, the public launch, the moment where the most eyes would be on the outcome. It isn't a coincidence. It's the exact point where the fear of exposure peaks, and unconsciously ending things early can feel, however irrationally, like taking back control. For some people, especially those who grew up in families or communities where staying the same as everyone else mattered deeply, rising above a familiar baseline can trigger an unconscious fear of disconnection. Psychologists sometimes describe this as the crab bucket effect in social psychology, where surpassing one's peer group can create real or perceived social friction, prompting an unconscious pullback to avoid the discomfort of standing apart. If success has previously coincided with jealousy, distance, or resentment from people close to you, some part of you may have learned to associate achievement with isolation, making the sabotage less about the achievement itself and more about an unconscious effort to preserve connection with the people you don't want to lose. Occasionally, self-sabotage isn't a conscious decision at all. It shows up first in the body as sudden illness, exhaustion, or anxiety symptoms that appear right before an important moment. This connects to research on psychophysiological stress responses, where chronic anxiety about an upcoming high-stakes event can manifest physically, sometimes severely enough to genuinely interfere with performance, independent of any conscious intent to sabotage. This is worth naming clearly. Not all self-sabotage is a hidden unconscious wish. Sometimes it's simply the physical cost of carrying enormous anxiety about an outcome that matters intensely to you, expressed through the body because the mind hasn't found another outlet for it. Put these all mechanisms together: the fear of what success might cost you, the pull of the familiar over the unfamiliar, the mismatch between your identity and your potential, the imposter fears reaching a breaking point. The fear of losing connection to the people around you and the body's own physical response to overwhelming stakes, and the pattern stops looking like self-destruction and starts looking like something far more understandable. An old protective system still running its original programming in a life that has genuinely outgrown the need for it. Sabotaging yourself right before success was never proof that you don't deserve good things. It was proof that some part of you hasn't yet been convinced that good things are safe to keep. And that conviction, unlike willpower, has to be built slowly through evidence, rather than demanded all at once. If you have ever watched yourself pull down something good right when it was finally within reach, understand this: you are not self-destructive, and you are not alone in this. That pattern was never evidence of your unworthiness. It was evidence of an old system trying clumsily to keep you safe from a version of loss it once knew intimately. You are allowed to let success feel unfamiliar without needing to undo it. You are allowed to slowly build a new identity that includes good things staying, and you are allowed, finally, to let yourself keep what you've worked for. Thank you for spending this time with Milky Way Psychology. If you've ever caught yourself sabotaging something good right before it happened, share your story in the comments. You are far from alone in this. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if this video helped you understand a pattern that's been hard to explain. Until next time, goodbye.